Salutations gamers, I'm the OgichiGame, and welcome back to the animation tutorial series. Now we're going to take a step back for a little bit, because a subscriber a little bit ago last week was sending me some questions in the comments about something that they really didn't understand, and I think I mentioned it. I talked about this in probably the first couple of episodes, but I guess I just didn't go over enough detail on it, so I'm going to go back over it. Now, the issue that they were saying that they were having was that whenever they moved, they were moving around the limbs, but it looked like the joints were separate pieces, and I'll show exactly what they meant when they said that. So let's just say, let's bring up our frames down here, and let's just say that, okay, so we'll put a keyframe right here at the very first frame, and we want it to take about 1 second for, these are two separate layers, you'll see. This, so let's just transform layer. Yeah, there we go. So let's just say, so what you're seeing here is that the arm is bending. We use the transform layer tool, as you see up here, to just cause it to rotate and move this direction, see? Simple. But the problem is, it looks like two separate pieces being moved. Just two different things being moved. So there actually is a way to resolve that issue, which is, let's go into layer 2, and go up to the transform layer, or transform points tool, up here on the left-hand side, right? And to fix the issue, all we have to do is connect the two joints. Okay. Like so. So now what we should have, now you'll notice that it doesn't quite bend the way that we want it to, because we have to put a few frames in the middle. So let's go directly in the middle and start adjusting some points and just say, okay, well that needs to be here. Go back. Again, around the middle area and say, well that needs to be here. Go around the middle, say, no, we don't want it quite like that. We want it to be following. Alright, so now you're seeing how we're doing this. Going again into the middle. And up right about there. So now you'll notice, go right into the middle, bring it down, and we're just adding these keys in here, these key areas, to say, okay, well you need to bend with everything else, like so. So now you'll see it just kind of, so now we have that sort of motion, see? So if this was an arm, it just kind of bends. Or something like that. Now, this is just a very, 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 just basic, gross overview of the basic idea behind it, but to keep everything together as one thing, you want to transform the points along all these frames, and just kind of keep everything together as it bends. Anyway, so now that we got that out of the way, I hope that helps. I'm going to go back to our other scenes and talk about the changes that I've made since you've last seen the animation. Starting off with, well, actually, I'll talk about scene 2 since that's the one that we've been doing. So first of all, I went into the sequencer and I moved everything. I moved all these group layers over to 1. Right? That way, the animation will not start until 1 second. So at 1 second or 24 frames, then the animation starts. That way we get the camera to hold on this for a little bit before it actually begins. Anyway, so all I've done is, so it moves up as before, but as you can see here, this faded thing, there is actually now a shadow which I've added, which is part of the hat brim. Okay? So that's there. Another thing that I've done is I did the lip syncing in the meantime. Oh, right. I've also added this animation with the eye, where it has this very, very dramatic effect to it. It shrinks down, and then you get all these, this is actually a mask layer. You don't see this part's out of it. What it looks like is more like this. There you go. Also added this, which is, all it is some red lines all kind of jutting about. And it's only really 2 frames of animation where it's out and then pushes inwards, and that's all it really is. This, same thing, I made it smaller, that's all I did. I just transformed the layer and made it smaller. So that was easy. Then I went, and I also did this sort of little thing with the animation where it kind of moves around like that to really show that the eye is really, really intense. And to do that, really all you do is you use the transform layer tool, and you just move it, you move both of these just around ever so slightly, but in sort of a kind of random looking pattern, and put it onto a cycle. Which I can show if I find the eye. Here it is. You'll see, like, the pupil, it's on a cycle, which between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then cycle. So it cycles around. And it does the same thing with this white part as well. And so I added that. And I also did the lip syncing, which I did off camera because it's easier, because there's a lot of noises I have to pay close attention to, but lip syncing is rather simple, and I'll show you. See all these little bubbles here, these frames that I've added in? All it is you follow the sounds. So you follow the sounds being made. You just listen into the sound that's being made and follow along with it. In fact, actually, I think that's a little bit off, because that should start right there, yes, and then, yeah. So, I'm not going to go through that right now, and just a fair warning, Payne has a purposefully somewhat obnoxious sounding voice. Actually, you know what, I can show you basically what it is, but yeah. So I only used, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different mouth layers. So it's a very, very simple looking, lip syncing. Very simple looking lip syncing. Now, generally, you probably want to have a lot more layers than this, but, I didn't really need all that many for it. But, okay, so I can go through it real quick and show you what it looks like.
You're serious about this, aren't you? You actually believe that you can win?
So Payne, yeah, like I said, kind of a I guess you could say a shrill voice, I think would probably be the right word. And there is purpose to that. He's supposed to be kind of a non-typical sort of villainous kind of character, where he has this very kind of high-pitched, shrillish voice it's obnoxious, but it's at the same time kind of silly that a villain would have that kind of voice, because you would expect him to have something, like, really deep and intense, like, what's a voice? Like, maybe like, oh, you're serious about this, aren't you? You actually believe that you can win. Hilarious, something like that, just a gross idea of, like, what you would typically think of the villain or something. But no, he's got this shrill kind of voice that I've given him, and that is purposeful. So now that I've talked about the changes I've made, I've added a shadow, I did this weird eye thing, which I explained, and the lip syncing. Lip syncing, pretty easy. Oh, and if you don't know, basically you just follow along and you pay attention to what the sounds are, and you go over to your switch layer with all the separate layers in it, and the way that you manually do it is you just right-click on the switch layer, and then you select whatever letter it is that you want, and it will automatically add in frame. Like, right here, there's no frame, like, at 4 seconds here, if I were to just right-click on O, it would switch to O, and then you see it adds a little bubble here, it's just a key to say, oh, right here we need this. Right here we need the O. So, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now that we've done that, that scene actually is done. Now I'm going to discuss, let's see. There's, now, one thing that I've changed with Pain is I added a shadow underneath him. I might add some more shadows to his body, but I'm not so sure that I want to do that. I'm probably just going to keep it as it is. The other thing that I did is I did the same thing where I went into, I did the same thing as I did with scene 2, which is I went into the sequencer and moved everything over 1, but then I also had to add a keyframe here for each of these to where they were in this position, because for whatever reason when I moved everything forward, then they were suddenly in this position, and then it just kind of like immediately jutted back to here. It went from like this to this between these two frames, so I had to add a keyframe here and here so that it, after I moved it with the sequencer, so now you can't see what I did with the sequencer because now it's saying, well, now there's keyframes at the start, so. But anyway, so hopefully you get the idea with that. With that, so it takes a second and then it starts panning across. And I did one other thing which I'll talk about, and I have a clip here of it that you can see, so hopefully you'll be able to see. Now, pay attention to the two different characters. As it's panning, you should see it, I believe, yes. There you go, okay. So, that blur effect, you can notice he's blurred here now, and as Pain was coming over, Pain was blurred, and this gradually blurs as it goes across until he's blurred and he's unblurred. And that's a classic focusing technique in film and animation. You see it all the time. You know, it's just a way to shift focus from one thing to another. It makes things look. You don't have to use it all the time. You don't have to use it at all if you don't really want to. I personally just wanted to do that because it kind of makes things look a bit more professional, I guess. And in my opinion, it looks pretty neat. It's a nice effect. Now, I'm going to tell you how to do that in Anime Studio. Very simply. So, if we go to Pain here, you will notice I have this layer blur. Now, in order to actually get a key for layer blur, what you're going to have to do is, let's see, okay, so Pain is blurred from here all the way up until here, I believe. Yes, right at this frame is when Pain starts to unblur, I believe. He stays blurred the entire time. Rather, hold on. I think. Alright, it's at a 0 blur there. But anyway, yes, it's supposed to be at a 7 blur here. Right? So it's supposed to be completely blurred here. And then it gradually decreases in blur as it gets closer to the frame here, where it becomes completely unblurred. Okay. And the way you do that is you just select the area where you want it to be blurred, and you say, okay, well, I want this to be, you know, a 7 blur, okay? And you would apply it. Now, I can't do it right now. Actually, hold on. Let me open up a new file just to show you how it would work. So let's take this, for example. Okay, we render it completely unblurred, as you can see there. Let's say we want it to be blurred at 1 second. So we say, okay, layer 1 at this, we want you to have a 10% blur. Then we want to have a keyframe. But we also want to have layer blur. So in order to get the layer blur key, we want to go into copy current frames and copy it to the same frame that we are on, 24. Go to here, layer blur, check that, and click OK. And then now we will have the layer blur, as you can see there. Right there, that one that I just clicked on, and now it's red. Okay? So now on this frame, it is 10% blur, which looks like this. Right? Okay. And on 0, now, here's a weird thing about Anime Studio. For whatever reason, you cannot seem to affect the layer blur on any other frame. After you create this first layer blur key. You can't make a new layer blur key on any other frame except for frame 0. So there's a very weird trick you have to do in order to do this. So you have to go to layer 0, okay? Go into the layer, and since we want this to be a gradual thing, we'll say, okay, well, layer 0, we want it to be 0. You want it to be a 0 blur on layer 0. Okay, and it is. See, on layer 0, it's a 0 blur. So, in order to have that gradual change, we go into layer 0, select the layer blur key on layer 0. It's red now, you'll see it. Now, and you copy that. And to copy that, you just click Control-C, okay, and click off. And then click on whatever frame you want it on. So I want it on frame 1, and add the key by pressing Control-V. And now on frame 1, you will have a blur radius 0, and it will gradually change the blur all the way up to 10. So like you'll see here, it's not really blurred on that frame, frame 12, it's pretty blurred, and by the end, it's completely as blurred as you wanted it to be originally. Okay. And to do the reverse of that, you would literally just do the reverse, where you would say, okay, on frame 1 I want it to be a 10 blur, and on frame 24 I want it to be a 0 blur. And it will start off blurred and then gradually change to be unblurred. And that's all I did for this to have that effect. It's very simple, very easy to do, and it makes things look pretty good. Yeah, and besides that, I really only added this one shadow here, which you can see there, to pane. So, yes. Now, I'm not going to get into the next scene just yet, because I feel as though there's a lot of information that we've had to cover in this. So let's just go over all of it again. So, blurring. We know how to do blurring now. If you didn't quite catch on to it the first time, just go back and rewatch. And I did go over enough information there. You should be able to understand it now. Hopefully, the blurring, it's very simple. It's not very intuitive for the beginners, I guess, but it's once you get the trick down for how you're supposed to create that blur effect where the blur changes, you'll once you understand the trick to it, it'll be all okay. Okay, so we have the blur effect. We've added in the shadows. Oh right, I forgot to talk about how to make a shadow. I will discuss that in just a second, but we have the shadow, we have the eye effect, which I explained. We just shrunk down the pupil and the white part that we had, basically the pupil and the color. Those raging blood veins in the eyes, all that was some jaggedy lines, which there were 2 frames where they're on the outer ring of the eye, and then they jut into the center. Then you have the lip syncing, which I explained. All you have to do is right-click on the switch layer and select whatever the sound is that you want to be using at the time. So if you need an O, you right-click on the switch layer and you select your O layer. And that will automatically add in a key, and you just go across the sounds and add in those keys. And then, I think that's everything I talked about. I think. Okay. Now let me talk about the shadows. So let me go into Pane and explain how I do my shadows. So shadows are very simple. Let me just find the shadow. Here it is. I labeled it shade right here. Now this is completely black. Completely 100% black. Okay? You can see it right here. But to make it look like a shadow, all I do is I double click on my layer, to go into the layer settings, and I just fiddle around with the blur radius and opacity. So for this particular shadow, I made it an opacity of 35 with a blur radius of 3, and that gives us an effect like that, as you see there. And I use that same sort of technique for shadows like on this arm and on the back and everything like that. You can do all kinds of different things with it. You know, you could say, oh, I want a blur radius of like 10, opacity 50 or whatnot, and it would look like that, a very dark shadow but very blurred and stuff like that. So yeah, so I hope you understand everything. I hope I've made enough sense out of it, okay? I feel like we've gone long enough, so I won't waste too much more of your time. If you don't understand everything, go back. Hopefully I explained it all well enough. If you don't understand anything after rewatching it, then leave a comment, and I'll try to explain if I didn't explain it well enough here. Anyway, so, if you like this episode, hit like on it. Otherwise, I will see all of you in the next one. Bye-bye! Boop-a-doo-boop. 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 Boop.